Welcome everybody to our weekly seminar series at the Department of Marine Geosciences. And today we are very honored to cross the pond and to host Professor Ilana Wainer from the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. So, Ilana, you're going to introduce yourself.
Yes, I will. Wait a minute. I've got an issue here with my there. Okay. So hello, everybody. First, I want to thank Nicholas for the invitation, Professor Walderman. Thank you very much. I'm Ilana Wainer. I'm a professor of physical oceanography here at the University of Sao Paulo. We have a big institute of oceanography, and I work mostly with Earth system models, which are very complex models of the Earth system. And I'd like to understand the role of the oceans or how the ocean change across warm climates. And what I'm going to show today is something I developed last year. The paper was published recently. And I tried to understand what will change the South Atlantic circulation. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about what the circulation is and why is it important, and the surprising results that I got using a numerical model with inclusion of these African mega lakes, which happened in the Green Sahara period, which I will also explain. So I'm going in here a little bit in the dark because I don't know all my audience and what your background is. So please feel free to, ask questions during the talk if anything is not clear. Okay, I'm just assuming this is an informal seminar and that, we all want to learn something from, something new. So this is pretty much a physical oceanography perspective on forcings or things that can change the ocean circulation. But of course, it has to do with climate. And now I don't seem to be able to move my slides. This was interesting. I'm sorry. Let's start again. Okay. Okay, I think it's working. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's start talking about the Holocene, which is pretty much the period that I analyze. Actually, I analyze the mid-Holocene, but let's talk a little bit about why is it important and why was I attracted or curious about the mid-Holocene. It starts at about 11.7 thousand years before present, after a cold relapse, known as the Younger Dryas, that reached maximum temperatures and the time that coincided with the maximal obliquity of the Earth axis. What does that mean? It means that orbital changes made the north hemisphere receive more insolation than the southern hemisphere. And we can see on this plot a temperature graph, which is the black line. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but this is a temperature record. And then we can see the orbital variations and the energy associated with the more insolation in the northern hemisphere. So basically, that's the main factor that drives the Holocene climate change, and which makes it very interesting. This is another way of looking at it, showing that these optimal temperatures were elevated in several regions of the northern hemisphere. And this period favored monsoon advancement and increase of humidity in northern Africa. So not only we attain a climate optimum, but these temperatures are warmer than they ever were, and they're more stable. So that favors the land-sea exchange of humidity and the hydrological cycle as well. So we have this increased summer insolation, and I didn't mention that before. It's mostly the summer insolation that increases, which strengthens the thermal gradients between continent and oceans. And this is exactly what intensifies monsoons, and in our case, the African monsoon. Okay, so we talked about more humidity in this period, more heat, and then we were going to get to a period that I don't know if you're familiar with, but it's called the Green Sahara. We had so much humidity that around the mid-Holocene, which is about 6,000 years ago, and it represents a scenario much different than what we have today. So today we have the largest desert on Earth, and at that time we had intensified hydrological cycle, which created a vegetated landscape with a lot of lakes. And the main characteristics of this Green Sahara period was, of course, increased summer insolation, the intense monsoons, the vegetation expansion, and this is really interesting. You don't only have a vegetation expansion in terms of area, but you also have vegetation diversity. You have more vegetation types. And of course, the formation of these megalakes, these huge body of water that were sitting in a region now that is mostly desertified. Oh, like, okay. Now, this is a plot that I find really interesting, which is a distribution of the lake levels across Africa. And this is about from 9,000 years ago relative to today. And where you see green, we see much higher lake levels. And we can see that the early and middle Holocene saw this intense expansion of vegetation, presence of lakes, showing that the region was a lot more humid, inhabitable, contrasting again with what we see today. And this is reflected, and this is what called my attention with so much more water and the lakes expanding. And when we look, I looked at this paper from 2005 that showed that during this Green Sahara period, this Lake Chad that we have today, and we can see in the darker black here what it is today, and a reconstruction what it was, probably 6,000 years ago. It had an area of about 400,000 square kilometers. And we can see, from the graph on the right that it was huge. It represented a major climate difference relative to current conditions. And it was one of the largest continental water bodies at the time. And so this is what, fascinated me. And my question was, would this mega lakes or this humidity in the West Africa region have any impact on the ocean circulation? And why did I have this question, this motivation? I was reading, the newspapers and the climate data and the blogs, etc., on the internet. And then I saw that in the, late last year, about a year ago, October 2024, there was this major rainfall event in the Sahara region that I show in these two slides, the precipitation and the vegetation anomalies, one in each side. And you see you had unprecedented rainfall. You had these regions receiving years of rainfall in just a few days. And then you have a significant greening, a significant response to this added water. So, it could be that we are going back to a greener Sahara, not necessarily we're in the same orbital conditions, but we have some similar physical conditions that permits this extra water. And I really believe this is related to the oceans, the warming of the North Atlantic. So it's really cool. The North Atlantic was really warm during that time, 6,000 years ago. And now, because of climate change, we can see that the ocean is beginning to get a lot more warm, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere. So what is the context here? We're talking about hydroclimate anomalies. Okay, simply, this means that evaporation minus precipitation is changing. And, before I continue and show the results that you can see on your left, I must say, I work with, climate models. We don't have enough spatial proxy data to actually do this sort of, more specific analysis. And when we look at models, models are a good way to examine physical process, and especially along the spatial behavior of these hydroclimate changes across time. And what we see here is that during the, and this is like, I don't know if you're familiar with the climate model intercomparison project, is all the models that go into the IPCC, the panel of climate change, to be able to look at projections. Well, these same models are run for specific paleoclimate periods, like the mid-Holocene or the Pliocene or even the Miocene. So you have a series of climate past scenarios that are run with the same models that we use to do climate projections to find out what's happening in the next 100 years or so. And for these mid-Holocene simulations, we can see, especially when we look at the middle panel here, which is the summer precipitation differences, we can see this green shows an increase, the significant increase in rainfall over the Saharan tropical regions. And I just want to make a parenthesis here and show, and then if we look at the other side, at my part of the world, we can see there is a drying. And actually, this is just something for a next talk, but it's really interesting because we found that there is an out-of-phase relationship between the rainfall, increased rainfall in West Africa over here, and the decrease in rainfall, or making the Northeast and North Brazil more arid. And this happens in decadal time scales. So we've shown that these changes in precip have a very significant decadal cycle associated with it. But anyway, this is for another talk. But so these model simulations shows that, in fact, for summer, we do have an increase in the precipitation in the Sahara, in the Sahel region. And, so this is a remarkable feature, and it's not unknown. So, so then we try to explore this a little bit more. And, and I must say, before I just dive into the model results, that paleoclimatic records are extremely important. I'm showing over here just a curve that you guys probably seen. It's changes in temperature since about 6 million years before the present, going all the way to Holocene, and then to the time that we have the observations, or we call the historical period. And then over here, after about 2005, we see the projections, and the shading are the ensembles, or the uncertainties around the mean. But most of this is different scenarios of projections, and we can see that they all take us to a warmer world. And the highlight here, what we showed in the beginning, which is a climatic optimum and the mid-Holocene period, leading us to the historical, and then to this very warm world, which makes us try to understand what happened in the past, to be able to interpret what's going on now and in the future. So how do we separate what is human-driven climate change then from the natural forcings, such as orbital forcings or volcanic forcings, or things that are external forcings but are natural, they're not human caused. And what we can see here today is an idea of what these past climates were. The color coding are pretty obvious. We can see a very warm world, and then that goes cooling, and until we were, the pre-industrial is about here, which is usually our control, and this is where we are today, about So we look at these past climates to be able to understand and predict and project what's happening in the future. Okay. And it's very important, since I'm working with models, and you might ask, well, how truthful or how realistic are these simulations, of the Earth system? And what we have to do, we are constantly validating these model outputs with observational records, with proxy data, and we are trying always to calibrate these simulations in order to be able to really observe physical processes that are realistic. And what we have here is a GPCP, is the global precipitation climate data project, and it's just a collection of observations of precip, and we can see this is how it behaves, in winter and summer, and showing what the precipitation looks like. And then when we look at the different periods, and we have here the historical periods where we have the observational records that we can compare directly, and this is our pre-industrial control, where we don't have a lot of records, but we know that the external forcing due to human influence was minimal. This was when the Earth had about 280 ppms of CO2 concentration. And we do see there are some biases, so we always have to keep that in mind. The differences between the observational records and the simulations, and we have to take to account these biases. Why am I showing this to you? Just to let you know that even though I'm a mathematical modeler, I do think that the data is important, the observational record is important in order to be able to validate the results that we obtain to actually corroborate our physical processes. So this is just trying to give you some confidence on what we're trying to do. And this is another example about, how models compare with the proxy data. And it's really interesting. So you can see in the left, the panel A compared to panel B. So we're comparing these precipitation differences of the mid-Holocene related to the pre-industrial. And we have two experiments here, one with enhanced vegetation, which is B, and one with just the standard orbital changes. And the little dots are the values of the proxy records. And we can see, when we have agreement, when we have a sort of a near miss, and the red are the disagreement. And the importance of showing is that, that the more realistic our simulation is, the more they will reflect or they will agree with the proxy. And in this case, we can see that when we enhance the vegetation in the Sahel region, we have a better agreement with proxies than if we don't, if we just have the orbital forcings. So this brings us to our motivation and objectives. I hope, the contest was kind of clear. There's a lot to unpack here, but I'll try to go slow. So where are we right now? So we've learned that the Green Sahara, this period of the mid-Holocene with enhanced vegetation in the West African region, has an influence in the South America hydroclimate. And this was, recent paper in 2023, which shows that changes in the atmospheric circulation patterns, especially the northern shift of the ITCZ, where you have, most of the tropical rain. It causes intense drought in most of South America, in mostly Northeast and North Brazil, in addition to these orbital effects. And this is in South America, but it enhances because it moves north, the ITCZ, you have more rain in the West African region, enhancing the vegetation and the hydroclimate over there. And then, we have the critical role of the South Atlantic, which happens to be what I know more, the South Atlantic circulation. And so we can see that, how does Africa and South America hydroclimate or climate relate to each other through the ocean, which is the South Atlantic Ocean. So it's really cool to see that the ocean has a very particular role in the timing and the intensity of rainfall in both sides, and the continent in both sides. So it controls precipitation variability, and it has a contribution to the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation. This is also another really interesting aspect of how different timescales of very important process interacts with each other. So the AMOC, and I'm going to show you an example later, which is a very slow, about 5,000 years circulation, has an influence of changes in precipitation, which is something that can happen in half an hour. In 1 hour, you can have rainfall, evaporation becoming a cloud, and then you have rain. So you have these very interesting nonlinear interactions between processes that happens in very different timescales. So, this leads to a lot of gaps, which will guide our objectives. So, what are the current gaps that most of these studies that look at differences in rainfall across climates focus on continental impact? So you're looking at monsoons, you're looking at things that are happening on the continents, which makes sense because, that's where people live, but we have a limited understanding of what are the ocean atmosphere interactions that leads to these continental changes. And of course, the role of megalakes are poorly explored. And that's what I found out when I went to read up around, wow, this mega lake happened. What are the consequences of having such a large body of water just very close to, a big ocean? Which brings us to the key questions that I was trying to address, which would be the Green Sahara vegetation influence on the South Atlantic. So there's kind of a crazy question. This is, the changes in vegetation that are happening now, like, the slide I showed a bit earlier. So the world is beginning to change its climate. North Atlantic is warming up, and we're getting more rain in the Sahara region. Will that influence the South Atlantic circulation, and the impact of the megalakes on the circulation, and if the ocean responds to continental changes? This is also, at least for me, it was an issue that was not clear. How separate are these, ocean atmosphere interactions relative to land use changes? And, and of course, we want to know how the ocean responds, and should we be worried? Will that impact climate? Or, what do we can foresee in the future and things like that? How am I going to address this? It seems like a big problem, and I can't really address with a lot of observations. So I'm going to use a numerical model. And the numerical model I use is the NASA. It was developed by NASA. It's one of my co-authors who actually developed the model. And it's the model, it was developed at GISS, NASA GISS, and it's a E21G, and it has a very low resolution. The atmosphere is only 2.5 degrees, 40 vertical levels. The ocean has a good resolution. It's about 1 degree with 40 vertical levels, but we're going to be looking at the upper 1500s, so we're fine. And I conducted 4 experiments, and I'm going to try to explain to you how these experiments are different. The first experiment is the pre-industrial control, as I explained before. It's a time around 1850 that nothing much is happening. You have a constant concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, which is 280 ppm, and you keep all the forcings constant. That means aerosols and orbit. Nothing changes. It's our control. The next experiment is what we call it's our mid-Holocene. And that's part of that CMEP, the Climate Model Intercomparison Project, that looks at paleoclimates. And it has an acronym for itself. It's called the Paleoclimate Model Intercomparison Project, and it's already on its fourth version, which just means that the models are getting better. And so this is the fourth iteration. The models have been updated, and it's abbreviated. It's just our 6K, our mid-Holocene simulation, and it pretty much has orbital forcings only. So all the changes that you see associated with the PMEP4 protocol are mostly related to orbital forcing. Okay, and then we have another experiment that I call the Green Sahara. Why? When we started playing around with these simulations and we enhanced the vegetation, we prescribed more vegetation in the West Africa than the interactive orbital experiments, we saw that if we had a better agreement with observations with the proxy data than by not including this prescribed vegetation. And so that was what we called our Green Sahara. And there's also other experiments associated with this, not only prescribed vegetation, but also dust. And so dust seems to change the hydrological cycle in a more realistic way than just orbital forcing only. And finally, and what's new here is when we added the mega lakes. I mean, there was in the Green Sahara, there was already some of the mega lakes, but in this last experiments, the lake levels in area were expanded. So we have these extra water bottles. And the results that I'm going to show you compare all these experiments relative to our pre-industrial control. And what we're trying to see with these, sensitivity experiments is if the lakes adding water bodies really would affect what was happening in the South Atlantic. But more than that, and I was very curious, was exactly to see if the land use changes in Africa would actually affect the ocean circulation. So I don't know if you guys are familiar, but right now, I think the Saudis have a project, which is kind of crazy, where they're trying to build a green wall. They're trying to plant a lot of trees along this region to be able to enhance this rainfall and make the region greener. So it's also another reason to look at, does this actually have any impact on other parts of the world? So what this slide is showing is just a little bit, it's kind of, I don't know if you can see the details, but it's showing the lake distributions in the several experiments that I analyzed. So we have the pre-industrial control, we have the PMEP or the 6K, which is just the, orbital changes. And then we have the Green Sahara experiment where we prescribed more vegetation and we have the increased lake presence. And then finally, we have what I call the lake experiments where we have the enhanced area of these lakes and more distribution. And then we have explicitly the mega lake Chad. So these are our 4 cases and the results I'm going to show. But before I show you, I don't expect you guys know much about the circulation of the South Atlantic, which is something I think is really important. And I just want briefly to describe what's happening here, okay? So the Atlantic is a complex changing system. Is very important, particularly because of the existence of the Atlantic meridional returning circulation. What is this circulation in the Atlantic? It has a very important role of redistributing heat in the planet because it takes the excess heat that we have in the tropics, and it takes it, through the upper layers of the ocean all the way to the high latitudes, where then the ocean waters exchange heat and energy with the atmosphere, and it cools down. The water becomes denser, and it goes all the way to the bottom, and then it comes back transporting, colder temperatures to the regions where it's warmer. So in some sense, this AMOC, it acts as the air conditioning of the planet. So it brings cool water where you have an excess heat, and it takes heat where you have a deficit. So where it's cold. And we also have what we call the subtropical cells, which are mostly a feature of the tropical regions. These are shallow overturning cells that connect subduction regions, or regions where you have water going, towards the deep ocean, and it connects that with the upwelling zones. Upwelling zones are regions where you have the cold water coming up, and then where you have a lot of nutrients and you have a lot of activity, and these cold waters are really important for the ocean biodiversity, ecosystems, and redistribution of heat as well. And any changes, in these systems will impact on modes of variability, like the Atlantic Nino. So we have a sort of a Nino, like you have in the Pacific, in the Atlantic as well, that impacts on the atmosphere sea level pressure, that will impact on winds, and will impact on circulation and precipitation patterns. So, I'm just trying here in a couple of minutes just to tell you how important the circulation in the Atlantic, both south and north, is for the distribution of rainfall and climate of the adjacent continental regions. So these are the main physical processes that are complex, that interact in different time scales and different spatial scales, that are controlling what's happening in the continent. So the question is, what happening in the continents? Will any changes in the continents affect the circulation? And do we have any sort of feedback associated with that? And just to make my point stronger, I have this shows exactly the warm branch of this AMOC circulation, and the cold branch that I said, what's transporting heat and what's transporting the colder waters. And then we can see here, that I made a circle around the South Atlantic, because it has all this inter-ocean contributions and contributes a lot with what's happening with the South Atlantic subtropical gyre circulation, which is the gyre circulation in the South Atlantic, which has a lot to do with the transport of heat northward. And and how do we link what's happening here? And we can see the South Atlantic circulation, or the gyre circulation. How do we link what's happening in the North Atlantic associated with this large scale heat transport into the northern hemisphere? So any changes that we have here, if the circulation gets too strong, if the winds get stronger, we're going to have an intensified subtropical gyre, and maybe we'll have less water being transported into the North Atlantic, which will contribute to the weakening of the AMOC, which will then feed back into the northern hemisphere temperature, which will finally have an impact on the hydrological cycle. I know it's a lot, but I just want you guys to have an idea of how complex the ocean circulation is, its time scales, and how important it is for the continental climate. So we need to know how these things interact, so we know what's going to happen in the future when the ocean circulation changes, and we know it is changing. So the South Atlantic, it connects three major ocean basins. Not only, you have the link between the upper and lower branches of this meridional overturning circulation, but it also connects the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Indian Ocean. So it's a unique basin structure. And so it will also, impact all the other oceans as well, beyond the, just the continental aspects that we're looking at. And here is just a zoom of what the South Atlantic circulation looks like, because when I show my results, I'm going to be focusing a lot on what's happening over here. And just, briefly, we have the Brazil current here, and we have the Malvinas current coming, and we have this confluence region, which is very energetic. And this is the South Equatorial Current branch, and then we have the Agulhas current that comes from Africa, comes here, and we have a lot of eddies being shed, and this is the famous Antarctic current as well, the ACC. And it's circumpolar, which is really interesting. So the circumpolar current connects all the ocean basins and is connected to the South Atlantic. So we have all these three important regions of the South Atlantic and the South Atlantic Gyre. Like I said, we have the Brazil current connecting to the Malvinas current, and this region under this red rectangle is very energetic. It's connected with this circumpolar current, and it's transporting also heat east-west like crazy. So you have a lot of activities that are spatially smaller. They're mesoscale currents or eddies that form these ACC. And here we have the Brazil current, and then on the other side we have the eddies of the Agulhas current that come over here. It retroflects in the South Africa, comes back, but it sheds these pockets of heat and salt that go along across the Atlantic, reaching this red dot, which is really, really interesting. And maybe in another opportunity, I will talk to you guys about the latitude of the bifurcation of these two currents, the North Brazil undercurrent and the Brazil current. And this bifurcation is exactly what gives you the measure of how much heat is going north, part of the AMOC, and how much is going south, and into the Brazil current and contributing to the intensification or weakening of the South Atlantic gyre. So I guess you can see how much this circulation is complex and how much heat is going around here. And then part of it, you have to think, is interacting with the atmosphere and will contribute to the forming and the changes of the precip in either side of the Atlantic. And then the physical processes that are forcing these things, and I don't know if you are familiar with or not, but we have the winds. The winds associated with the westerlies are responsible for a lot of transport and gyre spin up, and also the western intensification, which means the Brazil current might become faster or slower depending on the intensity of the winds. And then we have further south the South Atlantic current, which is associated with the eastern flow, the flow that goes from the South American continent into the Indian Ocean and into Africa. So these are the primary physical forcings that we look at when we look at dynamical changes of the South Atlantic. So finally, after all this explanation, I'm going to show you the results. And the reason I try to describe a little bit of the complexity of the South Atlantic circulation is so you can appreciate the differences in the results that I'm going to show you. So the first thing, and which is kind of easier to understand, is the temperature changes, right? So how am I presenting this result? So if we look at the panels here on the right, we have sea surface, in this case, it's a sea surface temperature. The panel A will always be the pre-industrial control, distribution. So we can see we have, warmer temperatures towards the tropical regions, the equator, and the temperature decreases as we go towards higher latitudes. So this is our pre-industrial circulation or distribution of SST. And these are the mean of the last 50 years of the simulation of, this is probably a 500-year simulation for the control. So when we have, everything stabilized, the ocean is stabilized, the atmosphere is stabilized. So this is pretty much the temperature distribution that we get. And then all the other panels are differences panels. So we see panel B, we have the differences between our mid-Holocene or our 6K simulation, where we just had orbital changes relative to what was happening in the pre-industrial. And then we can see we have a general cooling, but we have these little pocket warm in very specific regions, which is associated with the complex dynamics that I showed you a little before. So here we have a little bit of, the Brazil current intensification and the Malvinas current confluence region, etc. And then we can see that, the difference relative to each of these different experiments. In C, we have the difference relative to the PI control of the Green Sahara experiments. And remember, the GS is where we had the prescribed vegetation, and we have the lakes a little bit increase as well. And we can see now that we have, a general cooling, but we do have an enhanced warming also in the western coast of South America, but that extends all the way into the Atlantic, into the mid-Atlantic. And when we look at the differences in the lakes, and this is SST, which is kind of expected, but we can see that we form a sort of a dipole in the response relative to the pre-industrial control. So we have a cooling, well, pretty much in the tropical regions, but a significant warming in the subtropical regions and the western Atlantic all the way again, most of the Atlantic and a little bit in the western part as well. And these two, the bottom plots, E and F, are just a difference between the two experiments, the GS and the lakes, that do have megalakes, but they're a little bit different, and then the orbital ones, just the mid-Holocene experiments. So the GS, which became our standard because we have prescribed vegetation and we approximated it more to reality, but we see we have a warming. And so the GS is warmer than just the orbital only, but we do have a cooling in the higher latitudes. But when we difference the lakes experiment with the GS, we can see, a significant warming in the subtropical latitudes. So differences up to 0.3 degrees C. And it should be noticed that stippling is only for regions that are not significant at 95%, which means that most of our results are significant at 95%. So it's pretty cool, so these differences are very significant and very remarkable. And this is sea surface change. But hold on. Let's look at the vertical distribution, and this was a surprise. Okay, I could understand differences or a response of the ocean to changes in vegetation or whatever's happening in West Africa in water bodies at the surface. But when we look at up to 1,400 meters in depth, we can see also that that things have changed significantly. And so again, panel A is what the distribution of temperatures should look like in our control run. So we have, warmer temperatures closer to the tropics and the surface, colder temperatures in higher latitudes, and we see, the cool water masses extend all the way down. It's almost a straight down, and then you have these changes, the isopycnals are sort of inclined, the isotherms are sort of inclined. And when we look at the difference, we can see between the orbital case and the prescribed vegetation case, they're very similar. You still see a general cooling. You see, but then you start seeing warming south of 50 south, and in the lake simulation, we see a general warming in depth, and the cooling in the upper 200 meters in the tropical regions is still there. It's common for all the experiments, but it's pretty remarkable that we see the significant cooling warming, in depth associated with just the inclusion of the water body in West Africa. So this was pretty remarkable. And if we look at salinity, and just making another parenthesis, when we're looking at water masses, we look at combined salinity and temperature. And salinity is important because of its it's a unique property of specific water masses. And one of them we can see very well here, which is the Antarctic intermediate water mass, which is characterized by a minimum in the salinity that we can see here. So we have the simulation doing a very good job of portraying this minimum in salinity associated with important water mass. Why is the intermediate water mass important? It's because it sits at intermediate depths, about 600, 800 meters, the salinity minimum, and it's where most of the anthropogenic CO2 carbon is stored. So, if this water mass changes, it means that it will change the amount of CO2 that's stored in the ocean. So it's something that we're looking at. And then this is a distribution of the salinity profile. And then we can see the significant differences associated with the experiments where we changed and add forcing. So this is just the orbital, the 6K minus pi. We can see a decrease in salinity. And south of the Atlantic Central water, the Atlantic Central water is this, yellowish, closer to the surface expression of salinity. And we have a modified extension of the Antarctic intermediate water. And here we see again, what happens with the green Sahara. And we can see it's, somewhat similar to the orbital case, but we see some differences, especially at depth, associated with the lakes experiment. So we can see that the impact of having these mega lakes or the increased lake levels and lake areas will have an impact on water masses that are important for the uptake of CO2. So the main causes are the increased freshwater input. So you're changing, how the salinity, and you're changing in the evaporation rate. And also this will change the water mass formation, which forms while it exchange properties with the atmosphere. So this is a huge result, in my opinion. And then okay, now then let's see what the atmosphere is doing, because the ocean is responding to the hydrological cycle, to winds, and to pressure. So this is sort of a busy slide, but again, the A is the the control field, the mean field. This is the purple, orange is the sea level pressure, and then we have the wind vectors, which are really small here, but I guarantee that they are important. And where you have the whites in the winds are the regions that they're not significant. So they're mostly significant in the difference, and we can see a big change in sea level pressure. So basically, this is the process. Now I'm going to repeat that in the end. You have a big change in the sea level pressure distribution because of the different forcings that we add to the West Africa, which will change the winds and the wind patterns, and then you have alterations in the distribution of heat and humidity. And just to show you that this is true, here I plot, just the average zonal wind and its differences for each of the experiments. A very simple plot. Each color represents one of the experiments. Red is our control, and then you have, the lake is the one of the greens, and the orbital is the blue, and we can see that we have, some changes around the subtropical latitudes and high latitudes associated with the control. And if we plot the differences between them, we see that we have intensification of these westerlies between 30 and 55 south. They're stronger in the GS simulation, which is this cyan, this turquoise blue color, and in the lake scenario we have relative weakening and more pronounced north of 55 south. So, the differences show all of them with intensification and somewhat a relative weakening of the lakes relative to PI, but all of them show that we have this stronger westerlies, which is what drives a lot of the South Atlantic circulation. And finally, if we look at the barotropic stream function, and this is if you're not familiar, this is an integrated across depth integration of the meridional velocity, the north-south velocity. So it's pretty much what gives you our gyre circulation. And we can see here in the PI control, our pre-industrial control, what this field looks like. So we have a circulation like this. And, it's the Brazil current coming here, and then the South Atlantic current going westward, eastward, and so on. So we have the circulation, and then the purple is, the negative. It's the opposite circulation associated with the Malvinas current going northward, and you have this cyclonic circulation. And then when we look at the difference, we can see that the fact that you have these changes from orbital to the prescribed vegetation to the megalakes, all of these contribute to changes in the subtropical gyre circulation. We have a subpolar weakening. The subpolar is, below in very high latitudes, and we can see over here an intensified subpolar circulation in the lakes experiment, and also an intensification of the Brazil current over here. It's like we have a stronger circulation and complex feedback. So this is also very interesting because we're looking at an integrated field. So we're integrating north-south velocity across all depths, and it gives a feel of what the full circulation changes are. So let me try to summarize what all these results are. So as far as ocean temperatures are concerned, we have a general cooling with, some spots of localized warming at 30 south and the Western Atlantic, and sometimes it goes all the way across the Atlantic. With respect to vertical structure, we saw modifications in the thermal structure. We saw in salinity a decrease in central and intermediate waters, and the fact that intermediate waters are decreasing means that might have a feedback in what's happening in the uptake of CO2 and the release of CO2 later on in the future climate projections. And that's related to alterations or changes in pressure and wind patterns patterns, and we looking at the ocean circulation, which was the barotropic stream function, we can see clearly that the subtropical and subpolar gyres respond to the forcing changes in the models, and which shows that we have an amplification of these climate signals due to the mega lake effect. And finally, getting to our discussions, one thing that we know is the teleconnection mechanism, is the fact that you have changes in land surface going on in the West Africa that were associated with land-ocean coupling, which impact water mass modifications. It alterates heat and moisture fluxes. So we have these cascade effects, so you change vegetation, you change albedo, which means you change the way the radiation impacts on the surface, and then you change temperature, and then with these changes in temperature, you change the hydroclimate, and you contribute to the megalakes formation and expansion, and you might have evaporation and humidity, and which changes the atmospheric circulation, which finally impacts on the South Atlantic circulation. So the conclusion here is that the Great Sahara significantly influenced the South Atlantic climate system through these complex ocean, atmosphere, land interaction. What's new here is that, we always think about just ocean and atmosphere. We hardly think about land interactions. So this was a way to show that land interactions are also important to change whatever the atmospheric circulation response is, which will impact the ocean response. So the main implications are we have to pay attention to land-ocean coupling, and that can impact on water mass modifications. We don't look too much about that. And maybe, if we do a scale analysis of what are the main forcings or impacts on water mass modification. Maybe land-ocean coupling is very small, but it can't be negligible because we saw it's significant. And this means that vegetation and megalakes and humidity and excess rainfall will impact on ocean warming. We saw that, we saw that the ocean warms because of these changes and associated with the modified atmospheric processes and, of course, changes in circulation patterns. So main conclusions: Green Sahara, impact on the South Atlantic. We have intensified warming when we include the megalakes, which modifies water mass characteristics, which has, tremendous implications for the climate modeling. We considering impact of vegetation feedbacks, role of land use feedbacks, and it's really cool because the models are beginning to change, and more we have what we call dynamic vegetation models, are these extremely complex Earth system model, but with the vegetation changing as the climate changing. Before, you would prescribe different land distributions and vegetation distributions according to whatever temperature and humidity and rainfall results your climate model was producing. But right now, we're able to produce this dynamically interactive while you run the model, which is a huge change and might bring, new results. So, just organizing my conclusions. I can say that the Green Sahara, which is this period of extreme humidity and increased rainfall in the mid-Holocene, had a significant impact on the South Atlantic, modifying ocean temperature, salinity, and circulation. The megalakes, through the experiments, amplified climate effects, intensified ocean warming, and changes in the South Atlantic water masses, which we see through the salinity changes, were substantial, with implications for regional climate systems, and I didn't write down, but also for CO2 uptake. So vegetation in continental water bodies, become critical components must be included in these paleoclimate simulations, and the importance of these ocean atmosphere land interactions on millennial timescales. I guess I'm done. Thank you for your attention, and I'll wait for questions.
Thank you very much, Ilana. It was really, really enlightening to connect the two hemispheres and the two continents together, kind of. I open the podium for questions from the audience. Feel free to just enter the pod and ask questions since we don't see all of you together. So just ask the question.
I know it's a lot to unpack, it's very much. And sometimes it's very hard to understand what these climate models do, how they interact, how these experiments can be different, and why the response is sensitive to some of these changes. But it's fascinating because it's sort of like a laboratory that you can, change your parameters and then, try to understand what would happen. Anyway.
I have a question regarding the polar fronts. I saw it was kind of small on my screen, so I didn't get a very good look at it, but I saw that there were changes in velocity between the different experiments. Did you also see, or can the model give you a result that would show migration of those polar fronts, either to the north and south?
Absolutely, yes. And it's something we have done. We have looked at the migration of these polar front. We looked only at the South Atlantic, but I believe that, the other oceans are the same. And we can see not only through, do you remember the slide I show on the physical processes that we look at, wind stress curl, transport, etc., and we have an idea what the circulation looked like, even with the barotropic stream function. And if you look at the, the several periods, you can see that the fronts change position and become, more intense or not, because the gyre is expanding. Actually, it's really interesting. And now, if we look at historical data, if you just look at satellite data and you try to analyze the position of these fronts, just using SSH, for example, you will see that they are moving south because the winds are also displacing south. Now, the question is it just moving south or is the gyre expanding? So that's where we are at. So definitely you can see that. It's really cool. And if you look at last glacial maximum experiment, also you will see the opposite. You'll see the fronts moving towards the north. It's pretty cool. So the answer is yes. They are moving.
So is it possible to infer or make adjustments to the model regarding the ice sheet interactions in regards to that also?
Well, that's a brilliant question, because this is state-of-the-art modeling right now. We don't have interactive ice sheets. Okay, so this is a big issue. So how do you change, for example, the AMOC? Do we have meltwater fluxes? So right now what we do, we prescribe these meltwater fluxes based on a lot of calculations to make them realistic, but they're not interactive. Like the vegetation now is interactive, but we're trying to make the ice sheets interactive, because you have ice sheets, you have ice shelves, and then you have sea ice, and all these things have to interact in complex scales. So we're not quite there yet. But an interesting way to look at this is if you look at past climates, like the Pliocene, for example. In the Pliocene, you didn't have an Antarctic ice sheet. So you can look at these different experiments and see what happens with the circulation, with and without an ice sheet. But you can't really address the impact of meltwater fluxes yet. It's just the height of the ice sheet or the albedo. Yeah, but that's where we're at, state of the art.
All right, thank you. Very cool.
Thank you, Ilana. And more questions? Okay, so if there is no question, I would like to close the seminar, since we're already a little bit over the time anyway.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, I get
No.
enthusiastic, you know?
No, it was excellent. It was really excellent. I really appreciate. And I take your word that you will actually come to visit us. So I will
Yes,
in the future, in the near future.
I hope so.
Okay, thank you, Ilana. And again, thank you very much. And have a good day over there, over the other part
You
of the
too.
country.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, bye-bye, guys.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.